8 years, 7 years they've been doing it. But it's like Seattle. They did one in some little ass town in Washington. What was the name of that town? You knew it. Which one? Where Cascadia JS was one year.
It was up at Semiamu up in Blaine.
Semiamu? Nothing? What's the URL hack?
I think we're good. All right, I'm gonna make a couple announcements first.
Go for it.
We'll get started. Hello. Before we get started, just wondering, is anyone new here? First time?
Welcome!
All right. Well, very friendly community, so go ahead and, get to know everybody. See them around quite a bit. We do these once a month, and in 2020 we want to get back to it. Took that little hiatus at the end of last year, but we'll be pretty consistent this year. So any ideas, kind of as I always say, any ideas that you have for talks, if anyone wants to give one, starting with a lightning talk, moving on to a full presentation, just let us know. Let us know any ideas you have for what we can do for the community, as a group, projects, different ideas for themes and for our months and everything like that. A couple announcements before we get started. Starting at the beginning of April, Chick Tech, so another tech group here in Bend, is doing a really cool event for some of the local high schools teaching girls to code. And they are looking for volunteers. So if you got a free weekend at the beginning of April, right after this, I'm going to let Akira kind of go over some of the details. And I'll post a link to the info in the Slack channel and on the YouTube live stream. But it sounds like a really cool event and kind of getting kids into code. So if you have some time to volunteer, I'll probably see you there. 2nd, September, Cascadia JS is going to be here. And Chris and I are actually helping out a little bit with organizing and being kind of the local go-to people. So tickets are on sale now. Go ahead and pick them up. It's going to be a really cool.
Sun River, I think it is kind of cool.
Yeah.
That they're coming here. It's at Sun River Resort, and they are looking for people to talk.
Yeah.
CFP, call for proposal.
The CFP is out.
I think because we just happen to be invited to a Slack in which that you can see the CFPs come in. I think there's been 2, so your chances are pretty high.
Yeah, so if you need a link to the CFP page, it's on here, but I can send it to you as well. Either of us can send you the link.
What's their deadline?
Let's see. Let's click the link.
So you've been to one? Is it the first one?
I have not.
I saw a tweet by Tim.
So they've been going, so kind of a little bit of background, they've been
There's
going for about
acres
7,
and
8 years
there's
now,
one.
mostly up in the Seattle area. I think they
Think
did
about
one in Portland. They've done a couple up at this little resort in the north part of Washington, right near the river, called Semiamu.
Is that not
I
an
don't know if you've heard of
anchor?
it, but it sounds like a really cool event. They usually have about 500 people or so. Some big names are going to be there. I know Kyle Simpson's going to talk. I think.
Where?
He's doing a workshop.
Oh, you already know stuff about it.
Yeah, that's cool. There's a couple workshops already posted, so I know I saw Kyle Simpson's name and a couple other people were recognizable in the industry. So
I'm gonna go for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And then finally, one thing that we've kind of discussed, I don't know if anyone is interested, but we do have space here. And we talked about kind of doing a little bit of a library for tech books. Someone was interested in clearing off their shelves and getting rid of some of their tech books, so we figured we can actually put them here and do like, you come, take one, use it for as long as you want, bring it back, kind of on our system. But if you have any books that you want to clear out, bring them so other people can get some use out of them.
I will stock this library for its initial thing, which is not right now, but I'll probably do it in those shelves right over there.
Yeah.
And I'll make a little sign that says 3 books.
Yeah.
Or, borrow them, or I don't even care if you take it really, but if you, the spirit is to bring it back.
What if we have books that we don't necessarily want to give away, but we're willing to just put on the shelf for like a year?
Bring them, put them on the shelf, and then write on the first page, like, please bring back.
There you go.
And the people who are going to be taking them are in this room right now, so please, if you borrow one, bring it back, especially if it has something written in there that says please bring back. But yeah, if anyone's interested, just bring them in. Next month, we'll have some already stocked.
especially for the new people, if you've never been here, there's Wi-Fi stuff up here if you care, and there's the bathrooms are on the first floor, down the floor from us, and 2, 3 to get in there if they lock, which they generally do by the time they're done. They're locked.
And then finally, as always, we kind of want to thank our sponsors who kind of help us buy pizza throughout the year and put on the space. So obviously CodePen, Chris here, this event wouldn't be able to go on without him, and allowing us to use the space and hooking us up with beers and pizza when we need it. And CVT Nuggets has been a sponsor for a long time, and really appreciative of them, kind of all you guys helping kind of keep the community going. So
Look at what we shipped today, just today. This is, it seems trivial, but it was extraordinarily complicated. It's like infinite scroll carousel. It's an infinite carousel of excellent PS.
yeah, so if you've never messed around with CodePen, go do it.
You could click that for the rest of your life.
Yeah, how many pens are there?
How many pens? Oh, 60 million or something.
You really could do it the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, these in particular are editorially chosen, which there's not 60 million of those, but there's a lot. It just was complicated because we had to because we use Apollo GraphQL or whatever, so it has to you're on this page, but it's going to prefetch these four, but it looks like they're present, but they're really not really present. They're scaffolded there, and it isn't until you roll them in until it queries for the rest of the data it needs to do it. It's an exotic little piece of technology. The very worst part about it was keyboard accessibility. David's here, he cares about that. Everybody cares about that. When you tab around, we try to keep it sensible tab order. So you tab, and then other stuff gets keyboard focused, like the name of the pen gets focused, this gets focused. I think the Pro links to our Pro stuff. So you're and then the first way we coded it, it tabbed to this. But then I think if even here, the browser gets a little aggressive with how it wants to force scroll you to stuff. So if you were to tab to something over here off screen, the browser's like, I literally don't care that you haven't told me to scroll here. I am going to check the whole page over. And really, we don't want you to tab at all to that stuff. We want it to be you get to the end, and then if you choose to paginate, then it does it. And there's a interesting HTML attribute called inert that's supposed to be you put inert on this div, and then it's just dead to the world. No click events, no focusing inside of it. But it's kind of Chrome only, not something you can really count on just super yet. Am I right about that? I don't know.
I think it was a polyfill.
Yeah, right. And we were maybe, But instead, we wrote a more elaborate technology that intercepts focus events and sends you around and stuff. I ended up okaying it. It's a little bit more technical depth than I super love to approve, but because managing focus manually on an app is usually a little but it works, and it's shipped, and it's not a problem anymore, so I'm happy with that. I'm just talking to warm y'all up, because there's some talks coming and stuff. Here's one I learned just today, though, because I think that's the spirit of it. If anybody has a dead desire to talk more about code stuff, you could just, even if you didn't bring your laptop, you could use mine. If it happens to be a website or whatever. But here's one I learned today that I should have known a long time ago, but I didn't, right? So, a header and some text, right? All websites. Let's say you have the header isn't, this is not a fixed header, but you made it fixed. Yeah? So now you have a problem with, because that hides approximately that much of your website. So there's a header here, there's a header here, and there's these things in HTML, little anchor link jumps will push you down the page to that spot. So that's what these links are in the top. So if I click one, oh cool, I have no idea that I linked to that header because it's literally fucking hidden by the stupid header, it's butted up against the top of the browser and it's just there. And there's just this ridiculously simple CSS property that I should have known a long time ago that just says, when you scroll down to that, just stop short by that amount. That's all it is. You just click one now, and it's the right freaking amount from the top. There used to be all kinds of stupid hacks to do that, like positive top padding and negative margin to suck it up, or a pseudo element way over here that you're actually linking to, or all kinds of stuff. And this is supported in everything, and it just works well, and rock and roll, There's also like HTML, scroll behavior, smooth. Did you know that? Ooh. You don't need any JavaScript for that. It supports that too. It's kind of sick. I liked it for a minute, and then it turns out that if you look for something on the page like cons, it like as you search, it does that. That doesn't seem so bad, but I can't remember why. But a lot of people yelled at me when I put it on my site. They hated the find behavior would smooth scroll them instead of just get them to the thing. So I don't know, be a little, because you have no control. There's no control whatsoever about speed or where you apply it or whatever. I mean, you can scope it to a selector, but you can't. Anyway, that's all I got for you. What's the plan? Who's next?
So, kind of the point of today, as you can see, Chris is very passionate about all the fun stuff that he does and all the fun stuff you can find on CodePen. So, kind of the point of today is talk about just some side projects and kind of put out the call for some of those things that we do to code when we're not actually getting paid to do it, and kind of really showing off why we love to program and be in technology. We had four lightning talks, or 4 talks, drop down to 2 lightning talks, and then we have one more one. So the plan is we got David and Kyle are both going to be giving some lightning talks on some side projects and some things that they're passionate about. And then after that, we got a special guest. Young is going to do a talk on Flutter. And if you haven't heard of Flutter, it's a really cool new framework put out by Google. It's on the Dart language, which essentially they're very closely tied together. I know he's going to go into more detail, but the goal is one language, one platform, one framework, works on every device. So mobile, native, web, everything. And so it's very similar to JavaScript. I remember messing around with it and saw a lot of similarities, so that should be a pretty interesting talk. So going a little bit outside the bounds of just JavaScript today, but
Whoa, sneak peek.
yeah. And CodePen supports Flutter. Perfect timing. And then at the very end, if we have some time, since we had a couple people drop off for the lightning talks, if we do have some time, I might ask if anyone wants to be brave and come up and just, spend a couple minutes talking about something that they, some side project that they worked on, or something that they're really passionate about, or, could be your chance to get your feet wet with giving a little bit of talk. Doesn't have to be formal, doesn't have to, like Chris gets on here and just finds something interesting and talks about it. You can use Chris's computer, or if you have your own computer and want to show something off. So think about it during the presentations, and love to hear from you. Final note, we do have another special guest today. For anyone who hasn't been around in a while, or kind of didn't join, a year and a half ago, the original founder of Ben.js is finally back with us tonight after a long time.
Shout out. Hey, Drew. Thanks for coming in.
Woo! He's back there.
It's cool. We
would not be doing this. He kind of started this with a couple other people, but when I first joined, one of the first people I met was Drew, and got it going and got me interested in coming to this thing. So, yep, this is all thanks to him. So we'll get started. Who wants to go first? David? Kyle? Either of you guys ready?
I'll go first. Go for it.
All right.
I'm going to relinquish the airplay for you.
Just make sure everything's So this is just I literally have been working on this for the past 3 days, so it's not impressive by any means. But I don't know, probably 8 months ago, the place I used to work, I had to scrape a bunch of data from various websites on an interval. There's a billion different ways you can do that. There's tools out there that exist, but there weren't a ton that were super developer friendly. You couldn't programmatically specify what code you wanted to run. You couldn't change the intervals programmatically. You couldn't do a lot of things programmatically. So that's what I've been trying to make. It's on Heroku right now. So this is like basically what it is. And I might turn this into like, I don't know, paid service or whatever. But right now you come in here, you can write like a function. So let's say that I wanted to get like, I really like these shoes, right, on Amazon. Ignore my cart stuff. But I really like these shoes, and I want to do like a price history of this item every night or every week or every whatever, right? So for instance, I can like copy this URL, and I'll just test it out here. So imagine that like this, literally this iffy right here just runs on the page, and whatever gets returned is essentially like the JSON that gets returned. So then you're like, okay, cool, I have a function, and I know that it works on this specific page, but I want it to run on an interval, right? So here's like where you would specify a cron, the page you want it to run it on, the thing you want to call it, and then these are like all your functions that you've previously written. So for instance, here's like that Amazon shoe price, and then here's the history of the runs that I've done. So like price 57, 51, or whatever it may be. And if you want like multiple functions to run on that page on an interval, you can specify that as well. The thing, and this is like, I wanted to present this so I could get feedback on it because I'm trying to make it like for developers. The thing that I want feedback on is like how you would want to access this data. So I have like a couple different ways that I've thought of. One would obviously be like a JavaScript library that you connect to an API key and you specify like what data you want back. Another one is just like a RESTful API, and then possibly like a database insertion. So like your database, whatever it is, gets inserted to every night with all the results from your queries. Yeah, this is basically all I had to present. But web scraping, it's been done before, but I haven't found anything that's like programmatic and allows you to like actually click elements and then wait those clicks out and kind of gather data that way with actual JavaScript. So.
It's live on Heroku.
Yeah, I mean it's no index, no follow, and it's behind auth. But if somebody, if you guys, yeah. So if you want to test it out, just DM me your email and I'll whitelist you. Just please don't bone me because my bill last month was a lot more than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, cool.
That's cool. How do you pronounce that?
Betalist. So I literally Googled cool Greek words. It's apparently it's like it. I think it's like a token. Yeah. So House of God. Yeah. I don't know. Standard startup obscureness.io. But yeah. Let me know if you have any suggestions or things that you would like to see with web scraping. So
Did you see if the domain name is available?
I bought it. Yeah. Yeah, I bought it.
Yes.
I have actually. I think I posted a while ago. I have like way too many domain names that like I'm never gonna take off. Like, yeah. So cool. That was it.
I like it. Is it what does it scraping? Did I miss that?
Yeah. So it's just programmatic scraping. So you write your function here, and then it's JavaScript, so you can do.
Puppeteer that loads the page.
It is, yeah. And then you can run like if you wanted to do. What spawned this was I had to run Lighthouse reports. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but I had to run Lighthouse reports across like 250,000 pages, and so I had to like do all that. So one thing that I thought about doing was like, okay, maybe you could just have like a collect metadata button that you click, and it like runs a Lighthouse report and then collects a whole bunch of metadata and returns that back in the payload as well.
You have to scrape Lighthouse to get that data.
No, so Lighthouse gives you an option on how you want it to export the stuff, so you can do HTML, JSON. I don't know if you can do CS. You may be able to do CSV, probably not. But
Do you look at Playwright? It's like Microsoft's Puppeteer.
oh, is it really? No, I haven't. I haven't
What's
looked
a
at it.
lighthouse?
Great question. Actually, let me just show you one. So, I don't It's a Chrome, it's also a library as well, so you can use it programmatically, but it's built into Chrome. And it's essentially an audit on your web page, so you can, audits. So you come into DevTools over here and you go into the upper right, or wherever, however you have it laid out. But it'll run an audit on your website and it'll assess, I think, 4 characteristics. Accessibility, performance, best practice, SEO. And then it gives you like this report of like what you should improve on and all things of that nature. Yeah. But I didn't do this, obviously. This is like somebody at Google made this. But you can download this as an NPM package and then run it against any page you want at any time. So I was thinking about putting that in there, but yeah. Feedback, questions? Do this, do that. I'll give you money if you do this. I'll gladly accept it and do that. Anybody?
On the right there, that's like GraphQL.
Yeah. So what I was gonna do is just open it up to GraphQL. So like you literally just specify like your API key and then just pricing by limit or however.
That seems like
Yeah, and that way like they can specify what they want, also like a range of dates that they want, or things like that. So
right now, is it specific to Amazon price ranges?
no, you can do anything. Yeah,
so
so
you select any DOM node and
yeah, I mean, so this literally just think of this as running in the console on your browser, because that's literally what it's doing. So if there's any data on a page, if you want to interact with the page and like click some elements and wait for the DOM to load because it's like loaded through JavaScript. Yeah, so then you can grab that data that's in the DOM then and then return it in this JSON object. So I just chose Amazon because it was like a duh kind of one, but like you could do like Craigslist, a competitor's websites, and see what their copy is. Like grab information. If you're building clients' websites and you don't want to wait for their assets, you just grab all the assets here and like have it return like the URLs and things like that. Yeah.
I would think you're gonna start up it. That's like expensive. You're like, I will visit your
Yeah.
website, wait for it to load, click an element, then scrape it,
Yeah.
and then give you a GraphQL API to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't give it away.
Yeah. Cool.
Very cool, man.
Righteous. Thanks, guys.
Mr. David, yay!
Hey. Get this airplay going.
Oh, really?
Oh, okay.
two locations in their own.
Oh, do they?
One second. All right. Cool. So, probably my main side project is a YouTube channel that I do called Build UX. And what I really focus on is taking like aspirational designs from Dribble and then refining them for accessibility, for more of a design system mentality and things. And the current project that I'm working on and gradually releasing videos on is for this kind of CRM inbox design that has both a light and dark theme to it. And so I really had to figure out, when you're designing for light and dark themes, what are some of the challenges on both the design side and also the development side to really consider. And so going through this project and creating all these different components, I kind of landed on some best practices, at least for my own kind of workflow. And the first thing was, on the design side, that it's really helpful for your design tokens to have the same color naming scheme for both the light and dark themes. So there's a one-to-one mapping whenever possible. And in some situations, you're going to end up with a couple colors that are going to be shared across themes, and maybe even some exceptions to the rules where things won't necessarily map one-to-one, but if you kind of stick with that mapping, then things are a little bit easier to kind of wrangle. So recently I was redesigning my personal website, and I also wanted to implement a light and dark theme. And so when I was designing it, I also started with, kind of mapping main background to main background, high contrast, etc., and really naming colors based on their purpose instead of, trying to get creative and call it like charcoal or cobalt or, some sort of brand or terminology there. And so that works out really well on the design side, and it really is handy once you dive into code, because with CSS custom properties or CSS variables, you can basically establish your color book really easily. So here we have all the variables for our light theme, followed by our dark theme, and then if you want to make the theming dynamic, it's really great because then you can actually just point a common variable. I don't know why my syntax highlighting is not showing up, that's kind of interesting. But you can point a generic variable to whatever theme you're currently using. So on the root, we're going to set main background to main background light. And what's really cool is in CSS, we now have let me scale this up a little bit here. We now have a media query for detecting operating system preferences for light and dark theming throughout the OS. So both on Mac and Windows, users can say, I want my overall Chrome or my overall native app experience to be light or dark themed. And so what we're doing as a really simple CSS approach is if they prefer the dark color scheme, we're going to point all of these design tokens to their corresponding dark color properties instead of the light ones. And so this is really cool, and this is kind of the easiest way to get started with theming. It's really simple, but there are some limitations. And the main limitations would be that the user can't really customize this on the fly. They can to some extent, so if I were to look at my portfolio website with this code running and go into my system preferences, under general I can toggle between light and dark theme, and you can see it actually like transitions in real time, which is really cool. And this is all just native behavior, just normal HTML, CSS, and that's crazy powerful that you can actually do that.
Put transitions on it?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. So you'll notice that some of the elements, if you animate them with transition property, they actually will respect that transition as well. So you can see there's some transition happening where I would have hover effects on these elements. And I was thinking maybe I want all the elements to really nicely fade in and out, but I didn't want to do transition on all the elements because that's not performant. So I just kind of, some things are a little inconsistent, but oh well. So that's pretty cool, but what if users want to toggle the theming and without touching their operating system-wide preferences? And at that point, you kind of do need to dip into JavaScript a little bit. So kind of this level 1 approach works out pretty well, but let's think through what it might look like to bring in a little bit of JavaScript to help with that customization. So comment out this earlier CSS, and let's bring in a little more stateful approach to this. So one thing that we're going to have to modify is we are going to be looking for a data property on our body tag in our HTML, and this is going to be kind of a stateful hook for both our styles and our JavaScript. And so when the user wants to change between light and dark theme, we have a nice way to detect what theme they're currently setting. And so we're kind of separating a little bit from that operating system level preference. My website is using 11D, so they use this templating engine called Nunjux, but it's basically just HTML, so don't worry about that too much. So the first thing we're going to do is bring in JavaScript, and I'll walk through that in a second. And then we actually need a way for users to toggle the theming. So let's bring in a button as well. There's nothing too special about this button. It's hidden by default unless we load JavaScript, which is a nice progressive enhancement technique. And we basically have this ARIA live region, which basically means that if users are relying on assistive technologies, as you change the theme, it'll announce what theme is available to select next, basically. And I'll kind of demo that in a second here. So this is on our HTML side. We now have some JavaScript loading. We now have a button to actually toggle it. And if we look at our portfolio website, we have this nice little button here, so that way people can actually toggle between the different themes. So then on the JavaScript side, we're doing some simple DOM selection, just getting our button wired up, we're hooking into our app and things. When JavaScript loads, we make sure that we actually remove the hidden attributes so we can show this button to users that we hide by default. And then we have some simple JavaScript that just toggles if it should say enable light theme or enable dark theme, and it kind of trades out an icon real quick. Yeah, so this might be overkill. You could probably do something much simpler like flipping a boolean, but I've been really getting into state machines lately, and so I've been trying to implement really simple ones into my work because I don't dabble in JavaScript too much. But basically what this does is it says that the initial, we allow there to be an initial state, which we'll talk about in a second, how we kind of provide a sensible default. And then we just go between the light and dark state, and all you can do is toggle between them. So it's a really great way of being explicit about how you're handling the state and where you're starting users at. And with that comes a couple simple functions. One is to transition from one state to the next, so moving from a light state to a dark state, and a way to kind of send that event. And this is really inspired by XState, as I mentioned in that comment, but here I'm just doing like a really rudimentary implementation of that. So with JavaScript, probably the easiest thing that we can do is to, again, detect as a sensible default what that operating system preference is. So what we're doing is we're saying if they prefer a color scheme of dark, then we want to initialize our state to be dark. Otherwise, we just want to default everything to the light theme. And so if we look here, we have detected in my operating system that I have the dark theme, and it should still toggle, well, not yet, sorry. It should toggle if they update that in real time. I think there might need to be a refresh on that. So we can set it based on the operating system preference, and that gives us kind of a sensible default. And then from here, I believe people should be able to toggle between the themes, and they can actually customize it, kind of overriding that operating system preference. So this allows a little bit more customization again, or if somebody just really doesn't like how it looks, they can kind of eject out of that. But one issue with this is it's not going to persist. So if we want to toggle to the light theme and we go to a different route, it goes back to the dark theme. Or if we toggle the light theme and we refresh, it's still not going to hang out there. So to kind of further enhance this experience, let's start saving this theme preference. So a bit more code here, because we're actually going to start saving the user's preference using local storage. So what we're going to do is we're still going to detect that default, and then we're going to immediately store it in local storage, so that way it's there if they refresh, if they go to another URL. And one thing that we're actually doing too is checking if it's already in local storage to begin with, so that way we know if they're revisiting the website, which theme they already prefer. And so we really want to do this check for stored theme preference before we make any other assumptions there. And with this in place, we now have it in local storage. I think I might have broken something. Oh yeah, we have to actually run the function to actually check for the stored preference, sorry. And so with this in place, now we should be able to override our operating system preference and go to different routes, and everything should update in real time, and it should persist throughout all of the different pages there. And we can then change it up. If we look in the console real quick. 1 second. Not used to shortcuts in Brave, I'm usually in Firefox. Let me see, memory. Sorry, how do you do local storage in Chrome? Application, thank you. Forget.
And then it's on the side somewhere.
There we go. Hey, okay, cool. Let me see if we can zoom this up quite a bit. Okay, cool. So now you can see that in local storage, we're storing their actual preference, and that's what allows it to persist across refreshes. And as long as you don't clear your cache or your cookies, you'll be able to come back to the site and have the experience that you were hoping to have. So that's a pretty good user experience at that point. The only other thing that we're kind of missing now is, again, some of that progressive enhancement. So what we want to do is basically provide a fallback in case JavaScript doesn't load. And one consideration here is now we have multiple sources of truth because we could use a media query to detect it, or we could really be looking at JavaScript. And so what we want to do is kind of have a fallback approach in our CSS, so that way we can basically still allow that operating system preference to come into play. So if there is no JavaScript, then we have this data no script data attribute that we load on the body, which is removed when we load JavaScript. And if that's the case, if they prefer dark, we bring back the simple CSS approach where they can't customize it, but at least we get that auto detection happening. And so with all of those things in place, we have a simple toggle button, I guess. So it's a ton of work to get something simple like this going. But I think this kind of accounts for all the different situations of if they have JavaScript, if they don't have JavaScript, custom preferences, operating system level preferences, things like that. And
one left, I think.
oh yeah, what's that?
Well, I'm just curious because this would be like difficult mode.
Yeah.
Which is your operating system is set to your preference. Let's say it's dark, but on this website, let's say you prefer light. So you toggle on the light and it saves it in the local storage. But then do you get a flash of incorrect style as it loads? Like how do you fight?
Let's try this out. I like this challenge. Okay, cool. So we can see our Chrome UI is now a light theme, and we want, so let's say we want the dark theme because our operating system is usually, I think what we do is we see if it's in local storage
It's
first.
pretty quick. Like you
Yeah.
really have a flash.
And this is with, here. Oh, yeah. Let me clear my cache
I
too.
think the only way is a cookie.
Oh, okay.
Side bullshit. Like I don't think.
Okay.
Like you're so
Yeah.
close. It's
Yeah.
already hard. I know.
No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Do the device hints not include
I wonder
that
if they
yet?
do. Maybe you could
Then you can get away with not having a cookie, but then that's not saving the user preference.
It's just local storage is just
Yeah.
too slow.
It's just a little bit on the
But
client.
it's still
Yeah.
good enough. I mean, you went 10 times farther than anybody else.
I probably went too far. I probably should have stopped at the media query in the CSS. The only other thing that might be interesting to demo is on the screen reader side of things. It's important to note that not all screen reader users are low vision or no vision. There's a myriad of reasons why people might rely on assistive technologies. So a lot of people just kind of ignore the screen reader experience when they think about visual changes or visual preferences. Okay, I guess this might work. Maybe we can turn this up, but Sony?
To select this option, press Control Option Space. To
All right.
exit this group, press Control Option
Enough of that.
Shift.
All right, cool. So let's see here. If I can get it to focus on the Chrome. So when we have the button focused, I don't actually know why it stopped reading. This is kind of funky behavior over AirPlay. One moment here.
That's parenthesis.
Yeah, for some reason it's not live announcing anything I'm doing, but typically when you have a screen reader pointed on this button, it'll immediately say enable dark theme, enable light theme, enable dark theme. And so that way you have some sort of notification that the theme has been toggled and you're clear on what the current state of the button is. And so again, that's that simple little ARIA live region. Oh, no, it's
System
gone.
preferences. Brave browser. VoiceOver.
Okay, cool. So that's what this little ARIA Live polite does. And polite basically just means if there's no other important announcements, just kind of wait for your turn to announce it and don't interrupt, other things that the computer is trying to announce. So again, probably way over engineered, but I was just having fun seeing how far we could take it with progressive enhancement and things like that. So, any questions? Anything that I glossed over too quickly?
You just touched on it, but I know from your last talk that accessibility is such a huge deal to you. So I was curious if there's anything else that you could tell us, really quick about what you kept in mind as you were designing this.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I would say the main thing is color contrast is obviously like a first pass from design, making sure that there's sufficient contrast for everything. I did a couple things here for accessibility, like I am revealing content on hover, so I want to make sure that I'm also revealing that on focus, so that way text is always visible regardless of your input device. And for these actual links that are really cards, I'm using a pattern from Inclusive Components, which is a project from Hayden Pickering that I really like. Let's see here, pull this up. And so I'd really recommend checking out this website and also his book, because it goes into a lot of accessible patterns for custom UI. And basically for anything that's styled like a card element, where, you know, here I have a heading and a learn more link and an SVG, we really want to make sure that there's unique link text that's being read to assistive technology. So let's see, we can just inspect this. That might be the easiest way of kind of showing it off. Well, I'm not used to light operating system. Let me change that back. So let's see. So you can see that the link text is actually inside of the heading, and that ensures that each link is unique text. Instead of saying learn more, learn more, learn more, we have something that's actually unique. And then instead of that, we hide the learn more text from assistive technology, so that way it's not cluttering up that user experience. And what we do is we basically use a before pseudo element to extend the tap target of the link to the whole card. And that's something that Hayden Pickering goes into detail in his book and website, but there's, you know, a few patterns like that that I really found to be handy for this project. Yeah, of course. Cool. Awesome.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. I don't know how to cancel airplay, so bear with me. Cool. Thank you.
Sure, you want to give people 10 minutes? And then
Sure, let's do
Yeah. Yeah, so take 10 minutes. Oh, one thing we didn't do at the very beginning, we saw some new people in here, so say hi. Also, who here has a company that is hiring? Okay, look around. Who here is looking for work? Anybody? A couple? All right, well, make note and, yeah, connect, see if we can get a new job.
About equal hands, so.
Yes. I'm going to post it right now tonight, and it'll also be in the description for yeah. If you have any other questions, Zach or one of Okay, well, if you want to see anything about these guys, but there's probably up on
Oh, you need one too, okay.
Mark, on that keyboard? Really helped me see I have 4 other keyboards that I've acquired in the last they're all they're so I can do pretty much the same. That's my very slow. We're good. I have to turn it over and plug it in, and now I can't do anything. I need a spare mouse when I need to charge my mouse. Oh, it was the bill tracker one from the DOS. Yeah, I haven't gotten to doing any of those. And that was all really helpful. I wasn't asking for that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's really helpful.
One person has to have like a little crew.
Yeah, so about 30% of our team is I mean, so the biggest thing is the guy who wrote like our search
It's crazy.
I'm on the infrastructure side of I optimized my life to not have I lived in San Francisco. I worked in a Bay Area for a while.
Yeah, and they're opening up.
And then like people back.
Yeah, they're opening up.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the US, outside the US, it is pretty open. We have like 11
And like you can be
Thanks. I look forward to it. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Keep on.
Which one? Data set? Oh, check that? Okay. Catch me after. So I actually got they were like,
Attention that you're not getting
and kind of like in charge.
I'm gonna sit down with her and see what their process
I'll put up like
not tell a lot of stories. You don't have a chance to
It's really hard to
At the moment, we have actually here the last 2 weeks. He is looking for he was actually well, no, one of those is this machine. Oh, okay.
Okay, let's do this! Flutter! Thanks to Chris, CodePen, and everyone else for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
And I thought this is my second Ben.js talk. It's been a while. I've been in computer land all day like you guys have, so I'm a little out of it. But maybe it's my first. How many of you have built mobile apps for like production? Like if there's a person who has it installed on their phone, and that's pretty cool. Android, iOS, React Native.
Early iOS.
Early iOS. Oh, you'll love this.
First apps.
React Native. Android. Native Android. Xamarin or these other nightmares. Ionic. Native script. Okay. Interesting. So I am not a JavaScript developer, and so I come before you humbly because when I first encountered Flutter and Dart, I hated it. And now I really, really like it. And I actually like it so much, there's a purpose to this talk. And I'd like you, I'm not just going to present, I'd like to show you and equip you with enough of a foundation so that you too can go forth and build a mobile app with Flutter and Dart. If you're familiar with React and Redux and JavaScripty things, or even the web, a lot of the terminology that you'll see here is going to sound really familiar. These are Chromium guys from Google. So Flutter is a Google-owned framework for cross-platform mobile application development, and it is true native. It is true native. It's not React native.
It's true native. There's no JavaScript bridge, there's no Cordova bridge, there's no other layer, there's no embedded web view, there's no PWA Ionic trickery. It's truly native, and that's quite a feat. That is quite a feat in the mobile space. So how does it work? What's the magic? How does it work? So we'll see. What about Dart? I don't know about you, but it was years ago. It might have been 5 years ago or something. And this language comes out, and I'm like, oh great, another language. And I was skeptical. And if you haven't looked at Dart in the past 6 months or even the past year, it's a really great language. So the question I have for you behind the scenes is, when you see this Dart code for the first time, is it immediately recognizable? Does it seem kind of familiar already? I think you'll find that that's a design principle behind the Dart language, that it's relatively easy to pick up and has lots of modern convenience features for normal productive developers. So we'll talk more about this kind of stuff. But I would like you to try to build a mobile app with this stuff. So I'm going to start from scratch and show you how to get started. We'll look at some Dart code, we'll look at Flutter, we'll unpack how the tooling works. I think you'll find the tooling is fantastic, shockingly fantastic. For the more experienced folks in the room, so this will be approachable to the novice, and for the more experienced folks in the room, feel free to ask away. We can talk about state management, we can talk about Redux or block patterns, we can talk about asynchronous programming and isolates behind the scenes, and also how you can write a Dart wrapper. If there's a feature that is not available in a package or the language itself or the Flutter SDK, you can actually drop down into native code for iOS and or Android and wrap that in a really nice convenient widget, literally widget, in Dart to give you basically whatever you can do in iOS with Swift and Objective-C, or Java and Kotlin and Android, you can do in your Flutter application. I've yet to encounter anything that's not possible with the right amount of effort. Does it sound like a plan? It's okay? So maybe we'll just start from scratch, and you'll see some tooling and some Dart stuff. So what I'm going to do is, bigger. Flutter, once you install the SDK, you can do it via NPM or your package manager. You can just run Flutter Doctor, and that will give you a little bit of a diagnosis to see if you've got all the necessary dependencies. So you need Flutter, and you need one of either the Android toolchain, which includes Android Studio and the Android SDK and a Android virtual device, or Xcode. And the editors are optional, so what's beautiful about, one thing that I really like about Flutter and the design of its project workspace is that there's no friction when you've got diverse teams. So by diverse, I mean Joe likes Android Studio, and Jane likes Emacs, and John likes VS Code, and there's all this debris from each other in the project. It doesn't really matter, it stays really clean. So anyway, you've got some dependencies installed for building a Flutter app. You got some tooling, you got an editor that has some code, and in fact, I've got one connected device. You can plug in your hardware device, but I'm just going to do it the simulator here. So if you're not familiar with mobile development at all, usually on iOS you have to use Xcode, and on Mac OS, of course, and you'll run your application in a simulator. So the simulation is really actually very nice. In the Android world, you're running a JVM stack with Android Studio, which is a souped-up version of IntelliJ IDEA. And you can you'll typically write your applications in either Java or more modernly Kotlin, which is another fantastic language. So how the heck are you going to build something that runs on both these platforms? It's amazing that this actually works. So I'm just going to say Flutter create, what's a cool thing today? What's a cool thing that happened today on today's date? What's that?
Cool Greek word.
Yeah. Cool Greek word. Euro. Nice. So we're going to create this thing. It's banging out all this stuff. It's actually generating both my Dart boilerplate code, and it's generating two projects, one full-blown Android Studio project and one full-blown Xcode project. So let's see if I can do this. Okay, so you've got, whoa. showing you my dirty laundry. Okay. So you've got a lot here, right? You've got a handful of top-level directories. You've got Android, you've got iOS, you've got a test directory, and you've got some more. So here's a quick tutorial. You don't have to memorize this, right? But that's about it. So in fact, it was actually less than I thought. So let me just open this up and bump up the font here. Let me just expose some of this so you can see it. And this is the boilerplate. And I'm going to, is it command? I'm not a VS Code user. This is going to be really funny. Hold on a second. Just maximize this. Okay, cool. We'll dive in with this in a moment, but right away I can punch up F5, and what it's actually doing is it is compiling my Dart code to native platform code. So this is not compiling to JavaScript, this is not compiling to anything else, it's truly compiling to native code. It's going to take that native code, wrap it up in either the Android APK, which is the file format for Android applications, and or a iOS app bundle, and it's going to deploy that to the device. So this will take a second. I'm going to run this now. If you're familiar with mobile application development, you tried it, and you're like, oh, really? I'm going to wait 20 minutes for the simulator to fire up and boot up my app. You'll really be pleased with Flutter. So I got to make one change. Hold on, I gotta. Oh, this is a cool example. So there actually is, this is in app delegate. I have a different version of the tooling here. UI application. That is no longer that. So let's do that. Let me rebuild this. So you notice that was actually an Xcode build error. So again, it's actually taking all our code, boiling it down into native code, and binding it to the necessary stuff in our Xcode environment. One of the selling points of Flutter is that you don't have to redeploy your device after every change. So if you like iterative development, which is one of the, I think, pleasing points of the web, really fast iterative feedback on your designs and implementation, you'll really enjoy Flutter. It's far, far more, let's just call it lowercase r responsive to you as a developer. I try this out, I see the change. I try this out, I see the change. In fact, we'll see that these get deployed to the device. Our code changes can get deployed to the device before we even notice, which is very different from native development. So aside from this initial build here, which is doing a lot of tooling behind the scenes. Okay, here we go. So let's just wait here. So while this is booting up, so it's deployed the bundle to the device, it's firing up, and this is the default boilerplate application. We also have, since it's prompting me, I'll just show you, we also have really nice debug tools. And again, these are inspired significantly by the Chrome development tools. You've got a lot of Chromium folks that are on the Google Flutter team now. Let me just, this machine might not be right. Okay, let's just let it do its thing. But here's a simple application. Blow this up a little bit. And we'll see this, put this back. Cool, I'll show you some of those learning resources. Sure. So I can inspect what's known as a widget tree. So this is, you can think of it as a corollary to the DOM. And I can also enable things like debug paint. Move this over so I can see the orders and constraints by all the visual layout elements and so on. I can, of course, turn on select widget mode. So if I want to see, again, this is not that impressive because we have seen this before in our web-based development tools, but I can select any element in my widget tree, just like you might in the DOM hierarchy, and see it highlighted in the tooling. So familiar tooling. And it actually works. It actually freaking works. And it doesn't crash that much. Which, especially if you're used to Xcode, is nice. Okay, cool. So let me just make a quick change and show you this other big selling point of Flutter, which is hot reload. So hot reload, I'll need this again, so let me just move it over. Let's make it, so there's a label here, and I'm gonna clean up the comments so you can see the minimal code, but you have pushed the button this many times, or, yeah, you have pushed the button this many times. So, I love euros, there's a new euro place in town, I think. I'm gonna save this, and it's already updated so this is native code. This just redeployed a sliver of your application to the device with a little bit of debug tooling, debug hooks that are deployed along with this application.
Does that work on actual devices? Like if I've got an
Yep.
iPhone and an Android plugged in?
Yep. Yep.
I make a change.
Yep. In fact, with the latest version of Dart, I'm running an old version of Mac OS, and with the latest version of Dart and the Flutter toolchain as of December, they just had their recent hoo-ha conference. You can actually have multiple simulators up for different devices. You can have multiple hardware devices, and when you punch go, it'll build and deploy those devices simultaneously. It's pretty slick. I've been shocked. I feel like Apple development is filled with, this isn't fair, but false promises and the realities of that. But so far, I haven't been disappointed by what the Flutter team has delivered. It's been shockingly good. So yes, you'd get the same thing on a live device. In fact, it would be faster. It would actually be faster, I think. And there's a change. If we wanted, let me just do this. We'll drop out of. So let's say you're a command line person and you want to do the same thing that I just did, build and deploy it. You just say Flutter run and you're good. It'll fire up. It'll deploy to the device and do the same thing. So your teammate who's likes lightweight tools, they can stick the command line and the Flutter tool and their editor of choice. There's also an Android Studio Dart and Flutter plugin. So if you like heavyweight tools and all the nice things that come with that, someone else can be an Android, and you're not going to have you're not going to step on each other's toes. The heart of the Flutter application, I'll let you make fun of my, it is Command V, okay, is all the Dart code in this lib directory. So in addition to that is the iOS project. Okay, there's the actual Xcode project, and there's the Android project and its Gradle files and so on and so forth. We'll come back to some of this stuff, but let me just look at some code. So that is some of the tooling in a nutshell. So you've got a debugger that's really nice. You've got the Dart language, which we'll dive into more detail in a moment. You've got the simulator to run your app. You can also use a hardware device. And you've got the editor of choice. Let me just punch up, get rid of some of these comments so I can show you. So this is the degree you'll get, and there's a couple other boilerplate templates. But this is a nice starting point for your application. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you this code, and then we're going to build it from scratch so that you can kind of see two important concepts in Flutter that you can apply immediately. I'm just being slow here because there's not that much. Okay. So take a look at this app. So first, I have, first the boilerplate code, and here's the problem with learning Flutter. A lot of the books that are out there are total shit. The books are total shit. The best one out there is Flutter in Action. It just came out from in January, and it's from Manning, but it's not that great. The Rocks Press one is terrible. The others are really bad. So not only do they give you bad guidance and are wrong, they also show you a ton of bad Flutter code. So one of the things that turned my stomach when I first tried to learn about Flutter and Dart is seeing big pyramids of doom. And I'm also a fan of separating declarative style from my layouts. Like I'm not a fan of JSX, for example, and the way React does this, I think it's fine. And so that also turned me off. But furthermore, even the example code for the initial tutorials from Google are really bad. They don't really give you some best practices and guidance. So we're going to try to leave you with a few nuggets of this today. This boilerplate app has too much in this main file, but as you can see, there's a main.dart. We compile it and run it. there's a main entry point, and that's a function named main. You've got fat arrow functions like you do in your fancy JS versions. And so that's just main is a function that's going to return the result of run app. Everything in Flutter is a widget. Almost everything in Flutter is a widget. And it's true. So what we'll tend to do is we'll compose our application rather than extend the existing components. So we're going to compose, what we're going to do is create this big tree. It's amazing that it works so fast. This big tree of nested widgets, similar to the DOM, and we'll be amazed at how fast Flutter traverses it to render to determine layout, and then traverses it back up and generates an element tree behind the scenes, and then lastly generates a render tree, which the graphics engine handles. So I'm just going to delete all this stuff. So you see some keywords, right? You see class, you see my app, we see extends. It should be palatable. We see some parameterized types, aka generics, right here in the Dart language. So I'm just going to, I'll just delete all this. Okay. So let's just start from scratch here. And all you need to do to get started with Flutter is import that. So Material is going to import a handful of other things for you, but that is essentially importing the Flutter SDK. And the main function that material.dart gives you is run app. Okay. And all you need to do is give run app a widget. That's it. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a widget called app because my app sounds a little, I don't know, immature. So I'm going to say my app. Okay, so this won't fly because Dart is a statically typed language and app is not a widget. App is not a widget. So if I punch into, let's look at the source real quick. Come on now. Oh, it doesn't like the syntax. Hold on. Scratch here. Okay, we see that there's some explicit type information in the function definition, but Dart is indeed a statically typed language with excellent type inference. So you've got just really quickly, you've got your var, you've got your final, and you've got your const. So if you don't specify a data type, you can use var. You can also use the modifiers final, read-only, and const for compile time constants. So you can actually create a lot of your applications, if you think about it, they don't really change state while the application's running. They're pretty constant during the whole life cycle of your application. So Dart actually is pretty smart. Compiler's slick. You can mark things as compile time constants. It will generate those objects it'll generate the compiled version of the creation of those objects in the binary for some optimized runtime performance. But so I could say, x equals z equals 42. It knows that that's an int. Right? It knows that that's an int. Same thing for all your common primitive types. We'll see more of this in a moment. But there we go. So app extends stateless widget. Stateless widget is this abstract class with one method. And so every widget has one important method, and that is build. And this will help illustrate the building up of your widget tree to build your mobile application. So build is going to, just checking our time. Okay, perfect. Build is going to take one argument, and that is a build context. And that context concept is going to represent the location of this widget in the tree so that it can do things like reach up into the tree or inspect some aspect of state and so on. And what it needs to do is return a widget. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a center widget with a child that has a text element whose value is euros. And just to show you some styling information, and you may or may not like this, and change this a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and punch in style. And Flutter comes with this aspect of themes, so I can ask, well, actually here I'm going to create actually I'm just going to leave the sense of this. Hold on, I'll show you this. Okay, so I really have three widgets here. I have app that's going to be my root widget. And when its build method gets invoked, it's going to return its children, one of which is a center widget that's wrapping a text widget. Okay. And I may have to do, in this case, you'll notice I have an error, okay? And this is because I've deleted a whole lot. I've changed the context of the root widget here. I've made it a stateless widget. So I need to do a hot reload. So even if you're going to restart and redeploy your whole app, after it's built the first time, it's done, okay? And this is a different error. This is related to, this is saying, I don't really know even how to render the text because you're not giving me enough information. You know, most of your mobile applications are similar. Most of your applications are similar, and we also have ideas like the material design standards and iOS's, Apple's HIG, Human Interface Guidelines. So usually what you'll do is you'll actually return one important root, secondary root widget, and that is a material app. And Material App has a handful of properties. Material App, you can pass it a particular theme, a home, and you can set up a set of routes, strings mapped to other screens in your application. You can give the app a title, and so on and so forth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to punch in an important element, which is home. And so these are just named parameters in Dart. And the main component that I'm going to give it is a scaffold. The scaffolding is something like, it's the main framework of your application. It gives you some padding above the notch and a little safe area. It gives you a place for the app bar. It gives you a bunch of machinery. Together with Material App, you've got a navigator and a navigation stack behind the scenes for pushing and popping views, all built in, ready to go. It's really, really slick. Let me see here. Actually, let me just in the interest of time, I'm going to grab the initial one, just to show you some state. Actually, let me go back here. Just to show you some state. So there's two kinds of widgets in Flutter, and these were the two. This was the first concept you might come across when looking at Flutter. They're stateless. So the way that Flutter is able to rebuild our app and rebuild our and re-render its graphics so fast is much of it is immutable. So in other words, a lot of if you're used to some great aspects of functional frameworks, you'll really like the way Flutter has separated the two kinds of widgets. One is stateless. So these are ones that are going to display. They don't contain any state themselves. For example, an image widget. I mean, that's never going to, actually the image widget itself is never really going to change. It's going to have its image file once it's instantiated, and it'll always display it. Its parent might stretch it and shrink it and so on, but that image itself will never change. It's stateless. My Material App might be the main root widget here, and I'm passing it a little custom theme data, giving it a title. So these are three attributes: title, theme, and a home. So the home is going to be yet another widget that we've defined here. So the home page, you'll notice, is a little bit different. Home page is a stateful widget. Home page is a stateful widget. So whereas stateless widgets have one method to implement, and that is build, stateful widgets actually come in two parts: the stateful widget itself and the associated state. So the Flutter framework actually separates the stateful components from the stateful widget. And this is because, just pull this up, behind the scenes, you're going to build up this tree of widgets. Okay, I'm going to draw a really shitty tree here. Wow. And this is only one of the trees. So the one thing that really helped me learn the Flutter framework is to think of my widget code as really configuration for the meat of the framework. And the meat of the framework is really known as the element tree. So behind the scenes is an element tree. You don't interact with the element tree, but you dictate and configure it by your widget code. And it's actually the element tree that holds on to the concrete instantiations of those state objects. So these widgets, these are going to get destroyed, rebuilt over and over again, depending on how your users interact with your application, whereas the state is going to be constant. Elements might also switch up and down the tree in an optimized manner based on more complex interactions with your application. But this is really where state lives behind the scenes, and hence the separation between the widget class and the state class. Okay. You'll notice that in the state class here, let me just redeploy this real quickly. In the state class, this is mimicking a little counter. Okay, it's a hello world counter. I tap the button, it's going to increment the counter. So we're just using a simple integer for our model state. I'm going to change this just a little bit here. Just to show you one pitfall. Oh, let me change this. What did I do? Wow, this has never happened. Go ahead and just rebuild it. Okay. The interactions and event handlers that you have in Flutter are all declarative and functional. So you can pass in any closure that you like, for example, or the name of a function. So you've got this concept of a floating action button, or a fab. It's that button in the lower right corner there. What did I do? Hold on, guys, hold on. I actually want you to leave here and try it. This happened. Okay.
Are you not calling the main function?
I knew I did a paste enough. Thank you. Genius. Run the app. Yes. Holy shit.
Live demos.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to move too fast. Okay, so while this is relaunching, we have two classes. One is the stateless widget itself. Another is the stateful widget. And that stateful widget has one more associated object, and that is some state. This becomes really idiomatic after you practice it after you practice it about 5 to 10 times. The idea is that all the state, anything that might change over time while your application is running, is going to be encapsulated in state. You've got things that aren't going to change while your application is running, that can be stateless. But rarely does your application need to just paint the screen and then sit there. It's going to respond to interactions, and things are going to change in your app, hence the state. So the state object is one that is responsible for implementing build. I'll just have this pop up real quick. If you're comfortable with Flexbox or other things that we're comfortable with in the responsive or adaptive design world, Flutter has you covered. There are naturally, I think you'll find that the way that layouts tend to work in the web and in multiple modes, including absolute positioning with a stack widget, and Flexbox with rows and columns and so on, you'll be right at home here in Flutter. Okay, perfect. So here, when I tap this floating action button, we see that the counter is not increasing. Right? I'm tapping this floating action button, and the counter is not displaying. But actually, if we debug this, we'll see that I'm actually printing, every time I tap, I'm printing the value of that counter. And so one thing that trips up initial learners is that, let's look at this action button, and we've got first-class debuggers tool, you can put in breakpoints and so on. But when I press this floating action button, it's going to invoke onPressed, and it's going to invoke this increment counter method. It's private by convention, invokes then forced by Dart with that underscore. I don't know if I like that myself, but that means private to the file and or package. So it's executing this function. We see it printing. I'm incrementing the state. What's going on? So the one thing to be aware of is that when you change the state, you have to invoke that change within a method known as setState, and you pass setState a closure. So we pass that state of closure, and it's in that closure that we modify the state. We could do it separate, actually, but this is the preferred way. So I just need to remember to invoke set state, modifying my application state in the body of that closure. So now you'll notice it hot reloaded and already it updated the state on the screen. Right there's the real value of the counter right there. And as I click, of course, there's the updating. So I'm going to stop for a moment because there's so much to pack in, and I underestimated how short 30 minutes can be. The best way to get started is to not install Dart, but just install the Flutter SDK. It'll come bundled with everything else that you'll need. Go ahead and try creating the second step to take is to follow the Google documentation or the Flutter documentations. Create your first Flutter app walkthrough. Don't even worry about understanding the code. Just go through the workflow using the tooling and make sure all your tool chain is up and running. You'll see it'll walk you through some snippets of state management and so on and so forth. Start there. What is that? Let me show you 3 other references that are really valuable. Package management. Packages are available in PubDev. So you've got pubspec.yaml. It'll seem familiar to you. We've got tons of different packages. Many are named similarly to the packages that you are familiar with in your NPM world or your Python or Ruby world. So you've got first-class package management. The Flutter team has also published some packages that include native code, and so they call those Flutter plugins. So when you see the term Flutter plugin, it's a pub package, which is a Dart package. It's a pub package that is including some native code that can be compiled and deployed to each platform-specific device. 2 really valuable resources are the Flutter Widget of the Week video. I don't know how much these guys get paid, but they do a really great job. The Flutter team does a really great job. And it's their evangelist team, and they're pretty technical. These are all 1-minute videos. So getting your head around a new framework and its components, like where do I start, what are all these things, you can just sit down with a glass of wine or 3 and have seen all of these. So and you can just skip ahead the first 15 seconds because it's intro music, and stop in the last 10 seconds because it's outro music, 45 to 1 minute, and you'll see the situation and some demo solutions of using each of these widgets. It'll give you a sense of what's available in the framework. It comes with a ton of built-in widgets for 80% of the work we need to do. And one last thing, for questions before I dive back in, and that is the Flutter team, just go back here, has a handful of playlists that are super. Specifically, to get started, is this Flutter in Focus playlist. I'm not going to play it now, but the topics that you're looking at are things like material design, stateful widgets, stateless widgets, inherited widgets that allow you to manage state, some common things like using Firestore, etc., even fancy things with MLKit, using web views, etc., and then some asynchronous stuff with Dart. So if you like your async await, etc., futures are baked into Dart. It does a really great job of managing this. It's business as usual from your JavaScript world. Flutter apps are also single-threaded. This is strange. They're single-threaded. Flutter apps are actually single-threaded within a concept that the Dart VM provides, which is known as an isolate. So an isolate is a class that manages that single thread. And when you do some of your asynchronous stuff, it'll spawn, or background jobs, it'll spawn additional isolates. So these are actually pretty fantastic. If you want more about this, it's these handful of functions here: futures, streams, async await, generator functions. That might sound familiar to those who are using some either PubSub or some React-based frameworks and so on, or something similar. I've been talking too much, trying to fit too much in. There's so much more. There was a question.
Yeah, I did have a question. So I was just trying to understand kind of what you were saying about the trees earlier, but is state scoped at all to the specific widget or to the
It's a
specific
great
file?
question. Yep, yeah. So for the advanced practitioner, so once you practice working through a non-trivial Flutter application, I'd say state management is probably today's hot topic in the Flutter ecosystem. So you've got Redux, you've got Block, you've got something known as Provider, which is the latest approach that the Flutter development team actually suggests, and it's actually a third party, it's just a hippie that's...
But you can use Redux with Flutter?
Yeah, they've got Redux packages, right? So if you like your reactive style, you can do that. If you like model view update, you can do that. And I think it's that openness to state management that's made it kind of messy and loud or noisy
So
right
what
now.
about built-in like set state?
Great question. So built in, I'll show you exactly what happens. So the state value itself is which is your model, might be as simple as this variable, for example, and it's encapsulated in this state object. This widget doesn't actually own the state, it's the element behind the scenes that owns the state. So what happens is, Flutter is always asking your tree, and inspecting your tree, is anything dirty, has anything changed, do I need to re-render or call new build methods again and re-render that part of the subtree? And it does this really fast. And so by not calling set state, we haven't marked this spot in the tree as dirty, as needing rebuilt. So in other words, if you look at the source of set state, it's going to do some error checking, et cetera, et cetera. The most important thing is that after it executes your closure, it's going to mark the associated element as needing build. So it's actually going to rebuild that element. But the state is constant, it's going to stay in memory. It doesn't get rebuilt. At most, or I should say, it doesn't get reinstantiated. At most what happens is that its build method gets invoked again, and that's what triggers the update to the view. So in other words, you make a change, you define an event handler. That event handler, that function, might modify the state. Because it's marking that widget as dirty, it's going to be marked for rebuild, and so this entire subtree here is going to be rebuilt from scratch. All these widgets are going to be reinstantiated really quickly and efficiently, and then re-rendered on the screen.
So, maybe I could piggyback. I think at least the question I heard was, is the state scoped to a specific element, or can multiple elements, or can multiple widgets share a single?
Where they're calling counter right there on line 51 or something? Can that be anywhere in the tree?
It can, it can. And so you've got two general concepts of state in Flutter. They call it ephemeral state and app state. So the ephemeral state is local to one particular widget. It might be something like the color of a button, for example, something really specific to that widget. That will change, but affects nothing in the application. In order to share that state, you want to apply this concept of lifting the state up. So you lift, which I think some folks in the React world also sometimes do, correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to lift state up out of these child widgets, and you slowly want to bring it up the widget tree. So at worst, it's going to feel, and this is one thing that I don't like, it's going to feel kind of like global state in your root widget. But there's a better way. So there are a handful of widgets, inherited widget and inherited model, that are first-class citizens in the Flutter framework. And the way this works is you can, see if I don't have an example on this machine. You can encapsulate the state that you want to share in an inherited widget, and anything that's a child of that inherited widget, and by the way, this is inherited as in lower down in the widget tree, not necessarily class-based inheritance. But they'll have direct access to that member. So you can navigate in basically O1. You can reach up, grab state that's further up in the tree. That could be a function as well, or a callback that you can invoke. And so you can share it in this manner. The other manner is to use frameworks like stream builders and consumers, or a third-party library like their Redux implementation here to manage your state. And the latest approach is the provider.
Since it feels like global state,
are
there any issues with naming conventions and keeping track of that, or does it deal with those issues since they're private variables?
No, because they'll be scoped in terms of our code. They'll be scoped to that particular class. And you would reach up the tree via the type, so you can also traverse the tree manually, which is inefficient. Or if you're using these inherited widgets, you can also have a key associated to every single widget. If you wanted to, you could associate a unique global key to every widget and wrap it, for example. The trick becomes when you trigger the rebuild and you want it to be done efficiently. You don't want to rebuild the entire widget tree. You just want to rebuild the particular widgets that are affected in that part of the hierarchy. And that's something that the Flutter framework does amazingly well. Another common approach is to use this provider package, This is the officially endorsed modern way. At least this is the preferred way right now to manage and share state across your entire widget tree.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so the boilerplate kicks you off in a material design application.
Yep.
But, what if you want to build something that feels truly native on both platforms?
Yep.
How well does Flutter support that?
It does pretty well. So there is the Cupertino. I'll just show you. So in addition to Material, so by default, Material will do as best as it can to render UI elements appropriately on both iOS and Android and support the appropriate behavior. So for example, if you have a Material app and you're using Material.dart and you navigate to a new screen on iOS, it'll come in from the side, whereas in Android it'll come in from the bottom, and it'll do that automatically. If you want to further customize the look of this, you can import both Cupertino and Cupertino icons. So if you want some of those, actually that's an external package, but you can bring in Cupertino.dart, and that'll allow you to create those flat buttons, etc. So you don't want to litter your code with a bunch of logic, like if I'm on Android, do this, if I'm on da-da-da, do this. So right away you can detect the platform using a combination of both the media query and also some methods that are available in main. And the technique is to generate a single factory that you can use that'll generate the appropriate widgets, whether you're on one platform or the other. But this really boils down to most of the subtleties. So when it comes to behavior, the Material behavior actually is cross-platform. You just wouldn't want to use you wouldn't necessarily want to use a fab button on iOS, for example. You want to do something else. But the navigation stack and list views and so on are all cross-platform and work as we would expect on both platforms natively. So it's handled by the framework. Yeah.
I don't know if you were trying to cover this by saying it was all single-threaded, but is there some kind of event loop is there the concept of asynchronous code within Flutter?
Yep, absolutely. Well, there's asynchronous code within Dart. Absolutely. Yep. So you've got async await, you've got futures.
Okay.
It's all baked into Dart. And so in your Flutter application, you've got one loop that's pulling away.
Would it be pretty similar to the JavaScript?
It is very similar, right? So the main concepts that you're used to, very, very similar. So for web developers that are used to, say, Node.js applications or some of the popular frameworks, whether it's Redux or Vue, etc., I think you'll find yourself really, really comfortable quickly in Flutter. Yeah, sure, if you're a React developer and you're going to try React Native, I'm sure you'll feel even more comfortable. But I think the reality of weighing the constraints of any of the platforms that we use, whether we go native, True Native, React Native, PWA with Ionic, or Flutter, I think I'm willing to bet, and one of the reasons why I hope that you'll try is I'm willing to bet that you'll find that the trade-offs that come with Flutter are far, far, far cheaper than what we get with other frameworks. I've also had an abnormal amount of fun working with Flutter, and also Dart itself, which we could talk more about. Yeah.
When it comes to cross-platform build environments, I'm deeply skeptical.
Me too.
Because it's just been forward decades. And they typically fall, where I find they typically fall over is when you get past the hello world and you start getting into the proximity sensor, or you start getting into the sort of the weeds of where the platform is really varied. How does Flutter hold up there? And I'm thinking specifically of something like like building and packaging for deployment to Google Play versus the App Store.
Right.
Or like of, you know, sensors that may or may not be supported on one platform. versus
That's
the
right.
others.
That's right.
And anything else you care to add to that list?
The good news is that the Flutter team themselves have taken the responsibility of building packages, Flutter plugins, that have done all the native implementation for the common things that we need, such as sensors. So for example, from photo picker to the camera for still and both motion video to location data and so on. So at its worst, the most work that I've had to do, for example, is configuring both the Android project and your iOS project's permissions. So declaring those permissions, doing those in the actual appropriate plist files, or setting your, say, your Firebase keys or other API endpoint keys in those configuration files manually. What's crazy is that, let's take, for example, shared preferences, right? Something really simple. So you've got shared preferences in both iOS and Android, totally different API. They're key value pairs, right? For some simple persistent data. You can use this one API, it takes care of everything else. And there are no permissions that are necessary, nothing else. So that's a simple example. Another more complex example is, say, URL launcher. So every mobile platform has the ability for your app to bring up a web browser, or it used to be Maps, although that has gone away, the phone. You want to make a phone call. So you can just use the tell URL or the SMS URL, for example, to get your OS to change from the currently running device to the phone or other application. URL launcher does that in a cross-platform way. So that's taking it up one more notch. Other things like image picker has worked flawlessly. Image picker for both platforms.
I want to write an app that does, you know, real-time machine learning, you know, object detection on a live video stream.
Yeah.
At some point you kind of fall off the edge of the.
Yeah, sure. Yep. Let me show you. Yep. Let me show you. And I haven't had to resort to this myself, but let me show you. And I think that you find that it ends up being a lot more elegant than we think. In fact, even the doc itself is pretty short. So at its worst, you're going to implement that natively for both iOS and Android in those encapsulated Android and iOS projects in your Flutter project. At its worst, you're just going to do it platform native. And there, I'd say it's fair to say it's going to be whatever sick monster it needs to be natively. Beyond that, you've got bindings between, you've got straightforward bindings between Flutter and both your iOS and your Android components. So you get to map. You're going to have to map your API, but you can still invoke those from the rest of your Flutter code. And it's not like the. That's another bad example. I think some of the horror cases that we've had with some of the other cross-platform frameworks.
Is this like generating Objective-C and Swift under the hood? So
It is.
You end up just binding it that layer anyways.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay.
So at its worst, you're looking at still platform-specific native code. And I haven't felt the pain in production with having to deal with a unconventional situation that you haven't been able to actually stitch together even multiple Flutter plugins together already that are already published on HubDev. So for example, in this case, you've got MLKit. You can capture, let's say you want to take a live video feed and you want to do, let's say, face detection, right? You can capture the frames from the video feed using an existing Flutter plugin. You can cache those using, let's just say you save them locally, for example, using regular file I/O. And then you've got API to say, making a call out to MLKit, for example, and giving you back some geometry data and so on draw a rectangle on top of that image as you render it. There's a whole lot more to Flutter, including first-class animation, as well as the ability to take an existing Android or iOS app and embed a Flutter component in it. What else? What else? It's 8. It's 8. So here's what to do. Here's what to do. If you visit flutter.dev, follow the handful of steps, try it out. I think that if you haven't tried it recently, or if you've been scarred in the past, like myself, with cross-platform development tools, you'll be pleasantly surprised. It's definitely not a panacea for everything, but I think you'll find out that it's way, way better, miles ahead from other frameworks.
Can I get your take on this? Because I'm in this world a little bit, and you know everything about it. I built this thing and I don't know nothing about it.
Is it the?
I took over from your screen, so you can just.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Like, we have this little landing page for it because we talked with the Flutter team at Google, and they're like, wouldn't it be cool if you could use this on code? And I'm like, yeah, but it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
It's like totally different.
Oh, and Dart does compile to JavaScript.
Yeah, right.
And
That's
they
the whole
now
reason.
have been they've now been moving to you can actually write an application once. Not only will it run on iOS and Android, but it'll run on the desktop. It'll actually run on the web. It'll run right in the browser. One code base.
Nice and fast.
It's pretty crazy, and it freaking works.
Yeah, right.
So are you you're compiling to JavaScript? You're transpiling to JavaScript?
Yeah, because yep.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of templates and crap we have that are probably just basic stuff that you've seen, but so if I open this one, I'm learning from you how this all works. I just made it work, but I didn't actually understand how it works.
Yeah.
But it's and we don't. This is nothing compared to what you show because it's just one file. We don't offer you a little file system or anything. It's just the one main Dart file, I guess, that does this. But it supports whatever packages and stuff that you want.
Yeah.
Just kind of knows what you mean, I guess. But what's kind of nice is that if you have problems as you're doing this, that I was like messing with the randomization machine here. Like if I spell this wrong, we like lint your code all quick and be like, oh look, that line is now busted. There's other places I can do that.
The tooling has been fantastic. So if you're a tools freak like I am, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how pleased to help
One little syntax error, kind of like their linting stuff is pretty good. I don't know if you get that in VS Code or not, but they blast out the errors like pretty quick. And then if I make changes, it is a little like here I'm going to render 300 particles instead of 30. It's still performant as hell. I don't know what they do, but it takes us a minute to decide that you're done and process the crap and send it off to our processor. It does the trick pretty good, and I guess this is so I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Flutter's cool. Look.
Yeah. It's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
If anything, it's been fun to. The documentation is good. The supplemental stuff from the Flutter team is good, and it's been pretty fun actually. It's really brought a bunch of joy back into mobile application development. So if you tried it before and you thought it sucks, try Flutter. You might actually really, really like it. It's fun. It's productive.
Yeah. Do it locally, because I think that doesn't that make it feel real then? Because if you have it actually all going, then you're just skipping a jump away from actually shipping the app.
And then deploying it to the device.
But if you're just interested in the syntax stuff, this might be a fun place to
go. And there was a question about, I think Robert asked a question about deployment to stores. Baked into the framework and fully documented, really well documented, so you can take a look. I mean, it's aside from the dramas of getting things through store processes, it's really straightforward. I think that the benefit is that you actually have first-class Android and/or iOS projects in your projects with nice tooling in between. So worst case, you just drop into native for the specific things. Here, another example of having to do things native: app icons. You need to create your little bundle, so you'll do that actually in the Xcode project in your Flutter project, and same for the Android one with your XML definitions for icons. So
you actually create like desktop apps like Mac OS?
Yep, so as of today, you can, in the latest version of Flutter, you can build and deploy both Windows and Mac OS apps written in Flutter on the desktop. So you can deploy it to mobile, desktop, and be adaptive, right? Use a layout builder, orientation builder, and then just the responsive responsiveness is baked into the framework. You have an application that works in the browser, desktop, mobile, and both mobile platforms. It's crazy, and actually works. Next time I come with a more updated machine, we can actually look at one code base and deploying it to 4 different environments.
We'll have to have you back for a follow-up, for sure.
Sorry, fast talking, very dense, so much to look at. Please do play with it.
Thanks so much.
All right, well, it's 8 o'clock, so if you gotta run, go for it. If not, we'll be around for at least a few more minutes, kind of cleaning up and hanging out. If you want to, talk to some people, meet some new people. Also, if you're not on the Slack channel, that is where all the announcements happen. That is where I'll post some, any information from Young or any of the other talks about resources, things like that. Go to benjs.com. We thank Chris for fixing it up and making sure all the links actually work. benjs.com has the Slack invite. It also has our BenJS email address, so you can reach out if something's not working or you have a question or anything. But yeah, on Slack is probably the best way. That's where all the announcements happen, everything that's going on, everything that we want to post about. Also, if you ever have just a question, there's always people asking kind of programming questions, and a good place to just kind of continue the community while we're not actually here in this room together. On Slack, I'm Kyle. It's Chris Coyer. You guys didn't know. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.